Welcome to a KCL Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we've got something a little different and special. We've got a couple of guests joining us to talk about Revit and CAD content. Going to do a quick introduction and then we're going to do some questions that we have planned. And if you have questions, feel free to shoot them out to us and we will do our best to answer them during or at the end. And here we go. So we'll start with, I don't know in particular order how you're seeing them, but we're just going to introduce Daniel Levinson from Rika Tech. Daniel has worked in the food service industry for about 5 years, 3 of those years as a food service consultant before assisting in the birth of Rika Technology Solutions, which creates Revit content. Prior to this, Daniel received his bachelor's degree in industrial design after serving in the United States Marine Corps, which thank you for your service, Daniel. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Jeff Lewis, who has been in the field of CAD since graduating IIT back in 1997. So that makes him, old school, almost as old as me. I like to keep that, that I've been around. Manual drafting in CAD programs like AutoCAD 11, not 2011, but 11. To the current versions. He's worked with MicroCAD, MicroStation, and Civil 3D before making his way to the food service industry. He actually worked for AutoQuotes for a while, and while at AutoQuotes, he and Truman Donahoe started working with a group or a person, Paul Aubin, and helped FCSI come up with the Revit, first version of the Revit standards. There was a minor revision in 2015, but they put a lot of time into that initial document that many people have used for reference. After his time at AutoQuotes, Truman and Jeff started Food Service Equipment Symbols to continue providing quality Revit families to the food service industry. And those of you that follow Truman and Jeff on LinkedIn, Truman just announced that he's rolling into retirement or semi-retirement, and Jeff is taking over. So I just want to make sure for everyone joining today that Daniel and Jeff represent 2 of the 5 content creators that KCL recommends to food service manufacturers. We do our best to not play favorites. They all do a very good job. So if you're looking for content, I can help put you in touch with anyone, but these are the 5 companies that we work with or recommend. And let's get started with some questions. And I'm going to start with Daniel. Why does food service experience matter when you're creating content?
Well, it's really just because every time when we are creating content, understanding how that content is going to be utilized by the designers, the end users, and also the manufacturers, it just makes the content more fluid, easier for people to understand, and also make sure it applies to all the FCSI standards that you mentioned that are sort of a governing agency, if you will, to how drawings and things should be created.
Great. Jeff, anything you'd like to add to what Daniel mentioned?
No, that's perfectly exactly correct. That's how the standards were written up, and knowing how a Revit family works inside of a project also helps. Not just for the food service industry, but for as a BIM in whole.
Right. I'm going to just add my little comment of the families and the AutoCAD files we get from companies that have food service experience, like the ones that we recommend. The difference is they understand the industry. There's a lot of people out there that make Revit content for different industries, and we've seen what they can do. And it's usable content. It just might not be as good, or they might not design it with the understanding of how an actual food service design project works, which is quite different than windows and doors for architecture. So it's important when you do choose a Revit content creator that it's someone who does understand food service and the food service standards. So thank you. So Jeff, this one we'll start with you. Why would you recommend that manufacturers or dealers, consultants outsource content work?
Well, one of the things I would bring up with that is with manufacturers, a lot of your SolidWorks and your Pro E doesn't really correlate straight to Revit. Plus, handing it out to subcontractors of the recommended contractors we see here will help alleviate a lot of the stress that would come along with learning Revit and the long time period it takes to bring up to speed building Revit families. And on top of that, I would say with dealers and reps would be almost pretty much the same thing. With manufacturers, you wouldn't have to hire a new person to come in to learn Revit. You could keep your AutoCAD people with AutoCAD, SolidWorks, and such.
Good points. Good points. Daniel, anything that you'd like to add on that?
Well, there's also the other side that we've come across speaking with manufacturers is just the raw costs behind Revit. And a lot of manufacturers, they're already paying large sums of money for those Pro E software, SolidWorks, and the people trained to use them. And Revit is a very large expense to have on board as well as maintain and get people trained, as Jeff had mentioned.
So I'm going to recap that and say, really the point there is you can buy Revit and you can have someone who understands Revit or engineering, but they're already doing work for your company that you're billing, whether it's a consultant that you say, hey, we want to get a special family. I know that many of the groups we recommend can do custom families. If you're a manufacturer, you're paying your engineers to engineer. Now, if they have a lot of downtime, that's a different story. And again, you know, some of the groups here will recommend or can offer content training. So we do have manufacturers that have said, well, we really want to do it in-house. Then we're going to say, you want someone to learn how to do it right. Don't just let them go look online to see what's happening. Now, a little bit about your experiences when you get files from manufacturers. So we'll flip back, Daniel. You know, what do they typically send you and what's the process?
So depending on the program that is exporting files that we are receiving, in some cases they can be either off scale, which can cause some serious issues in communication between multiple forms of software. But the other side is usually when you export out of something like SolidWorks and or Pro E, you are getting everything, every nitty-gritty piece of detail that in the reality of the design industry, when it goes into a project or something like that, is not needed. Not that level of detail is needed. Or in some cases, we hear there's worries about proprietary information or proprietary design work inside of their equipment that can be then transmitted over 2D or even in some cases 3D. And usually what happens when we receive something like that is we're cleaning it up, we're removing a lot of that extraneous detail that is not needed, but that can also sometimes result in missing information or misaligning information to specifications. So it takes a lot longer to clean something up from those programs than going the other direction, which would be starting in Revit and then generating CAD out of it or of the sort like that.
I like that. I like that. Jeff, how about your, you know, when you and your team are getting files from manufacturers?
The biggest thing we come across is dealing with manufacturers with a lot of options. Getting files from them that only depict one option when you have to do the front end housework of Revit is usually what takes the most time. Is you need to get CAD or information about all the options. And there is some upfront time with that, but once that's usually settled, your Revit moves fairly quickly. And everything that, you know, Daniel was saying is getting step files can be a lot of proprietary information inside of that. So we kind of let them know, hey, just give us the outside information. And if we require any internal information, we'll let you know, and then you can do what you need with it. So it's just getting all those options up front so they can be put into the Revit file up front and take less time off the back end.
Excellent. Yeah, again, I'm going to give my summary. Yep. Manufacturers out there, you can provide additional information to the content creator via PDF, via AutoCAD, via Pro E, whatever format you want, but it's not going to auto convert, but it will help them with the information they need. If you want that handle the right size, your spec sheet doesn't show that. And again, I assume for both of you that if a manufacturer asks you to sign an NDA, you'll do that to keep any files or data they send you, you know, in-house.
Absolutely.
Good, good. So yeah, have you had manufacturers recently approach you and say, well, we're worried about people using our files, you know, for other manufacturers? Does that come up? Is that an issue these days?
Not as much here.
Not as often. It's usually us, like I had mentioned earlier, scaling down information that we receive to help them ahead of that curve before that question even comes about.
Right. The idea is, and I heard you both mention it, we want the shells. We don't care about a compressor inside the refrigerator. That's important to manufacturing and engineering, but for someone who's trying to do a drawing, they don't need to show that inside detail. Now, if you want to, and this gets a little tricky, is let's say you have a glass door refrigerator, some manufacturers want to show the shelving inside it. You know, you can, but then you get, well, if the shelving can be modified and adjustable, you now have to provide those options. So the majority will say, look, we just want to show it's a 2-3 door glass refrigerator, which way the swings will go. But it is important if you're a manufacturer or you're looking for custom content to provide the information to your outsource company or your in-house people if you do that. So we want to talk a little bit about, you know, what the recommended contractors from KCL, why do we use this list and what do they bring? And I'm just going to start this out with number one. When you go to one of these 5 companies, they will send us a ready to go submittal. Submittals include the Excel data files that we have. Submittals are Revit, CAD, and at a minimum, if you have PDF spec sheets available. There are manufacturers that don't have those files available, and that's okay. If you're a manufacturer, we really want you to do both the CAD and Revit. You can do CAD in-house and let them do the Revit, but if you have the outside firms do Revit and CAD at the same time, you're guaranteed that everything matches. And that way, if you have something that is, you know, I'll say 1/8 of an inch, or you want to go to 30 seconds and they do it in Revit, but maybe your CAD people did it slightly different, they may not match. And on occasion, that does show up where your in-house people took advantage of the knowledge they have, and they did the CAD block exactly correct because changes were made, but that wasn't passed along to the outsource team, where if you send the information to an outsource contractor, they're going to go ahead and make sure the CAD and Revit files match. So that's from my side. The next step that happens is when submittals are sent, mistakes happen. We're all human. It could be a typo in the Excel. Hey, we forgot to include a file in the zip. We're going to catch that as we process, and we just go right back to them. So you don't have to know that there's any minor issues. You're alerted when the files are done and loaded. So I'm going to put you two on the spot a little bit and say, you know, take 30 seconds, a minute. We'll start with Jeff of, you know, working with KCL, response time, information, you know, what do we do that works well for you?
Well, just getting us the spreadsheets that we need quickly. If there's any related CAD files in there, if they're old or new, or working with the manufacturer to clean up old files that might not be viable anymore in KCL, getting updated PDFs involved.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Daniel, I know we're relatively new working together, but you know, hopefully you've got a couple things that work well with us.
Absolutely. No, it's your response times have been phenomenal. We're talking a matter of hours usually to get stuff back from you when we're requesting it, so we can properly package and generate submittals. Understanding processing time, very open, easy communication has been highly successful with us as well.
Good, good. Well, you know, again, for everyone watching, I want to make sure I say this because it comes up once in a while. We have no financial ties to any of these 5 companies. Our goal is to get good content from the manufacturer to the content creator out to you. And here, let me just see, I did enter that. A question that popped up, are the manufacturers provided with the FCSI shared parameter list? And that's a great question. I responded, if you can see, I don't know if you're able to see the answers, but I said yes if they want that information. So, but the issue is some of them don't really understand that. And we do our best to try to tell them, but that's why we push for using an outsourced firm, because you all know that information. So it gets a little bit tricky. It's a great question here. Next question said, is everyone here involved with the FCSI Revit standards choice? No. Today's audience is a mix of manufacturers, dealers, consultants, and reps. We're not going to get into too much detail on this. As of right now, the FCSI standards, they published potential changes, but it has not been confirmed yet. We did take the 5 Revit contractors plus a couple other people we work with, and we did review and give our feedback on the potential new standards. They were not major changes to the parameters. Manufacturers, don't panic. A detail I'll throw out there is in 2015, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong here, we changed, the industry changed some subcategory names and material names slightly. And one of the things KCL did is we actually mapped and merged, and we processed those files so that no one had to make manual changes. If possible, we'll do that again if things change, but we're really hoping that the new standards are more simplified documents. And Danya, I completely agree with your last question. It's in everyone's opinion that, you know, if you don't really understand how Revit works in our industry, you shouldn't be making those files. And Daniel and Jeff mentioned this. We see Revit files that are not really Revit files. They may be an inventor file that someone saved as Revit. And technically it's a Revit file, but it's not a natively created one. And that's one of the benefits of working with these different outsource contractors. In both your cases, I'm hoping that the answer is the same, but who owns your Revit and CAD files when you're done with the project? Jeff?
The manufacturer.
Daniel, that's
sorry.
You're okay. I paused. Jeff?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The manufacturer owns the files.
Right. And if you do that for anyone that you're outsourcing to, you're doing it for them. If a consultant says, hey, we need the best sink ever that can do multiple compartments and do other things as well, you know, it's their content. So make sure when you work with a content creator that the information is yours to do with what you want. Okay.
And I'll add to that is also whenever consultants come and ask us for a specific manufacturer that just hasn't moved forward, but they want a single piece, they own that piece. We won't sell it to the manufacturer.
Interesting. That's okay. So you'll do the work for the consultant. If the manufacturer hasn't, the consultant pays you. Technically, that's their information. Understand? Correct. Okay, great, great. We had another quick question here from Nick. Have the parameters been simplified? No, the parameters actually will be expanded. And if done properly, each family only has the parameters it needs. Way back in the 2010, 2011 Revit days, there were people that were putting every parameter on a family, and then you'd have to go get rid of them. But there are parameters that will be added. There's an international group that does have meetings that I'm going to say is open to just about anyone. I really don't know the requirements. I mean, they let me in, so they let anyone in there. If you're interested in the IFSC group, feel free to send me an email and I can pass it along to the people in charge of that. That is where we discuss adding parameters worldwide. So thank you. Those are some good pieces there to know. Let's see. If a manufacturer wants to do this in-house, what do you recommend that they need to know? Daniel.
Oh, that could be a very large list or a very small list, but to start off is to build everything natively within Revit, as has been mentioned a few times already so far. As soon as you start mixing between platforms, you're going to lose functionality, and you're also going to get what we all have heard at one point or another, file bloat, where it's going to start slowing down projects as they are brought into different projects. Native Revit is faster and smoother to operate within its own program. And that's where I would definitely begin.
And then also, yeah, I would add to that is make sure getting hold of the standards of the industry you're working in. Of course, for food service, we need to get those standards. They need to know those standards and understand all the intricacies that a Revit family deals with into a project. 95% of what you do in a Revit family affects the Revit project in some way or another.
Great. Well, manufacturers who are listening, take note of these, please. I know my answer, but I would like to hear, we'll start with Jeff. Why do you think 2D CAD is still relevant or necessary? I know that everyone loves Revit, but do you have any thoughts on that you want to share?
Well, not everybody's up to speed on Revit. Not everybody's doing BIM. 2D CAD can actually give you a quick preliminary layout, and then you can move it into Revit. But don't bring CAD into Revit families because you're just going to get a bunch of junk. That's another thing that we want to worry about. But yes, 2D CAD is still necessary for the people that do not have Revit and just want to do a quick 2D CAD layout.
Okay. Daniel?
I would actually follow up with, as Jeff was saying, there's also still parts in the design industry across the world right now that are not in Revit at all. So if you go 100% Revit with no CAD, you can possibly be negating your equipment out from what they can utilize internally to their designs. So it is still very, very relevant until there's no such thing as CAD, but that is never going to happen in my eyes.
Right. Great. And now, again, I'm going to put my extra on that and say, manufacturers listening, please do both. Even here in the States, we still have almost half the users running AutoCAD. So it's a matter of you want to take care of Revit and you want to take care of CAD. I'm going to switch over, see if I get the screen up, to show just a real quick function in KCL that because we have manufacturers and that maybe have done Revit and not CAD, it very much frustrates those 2D or CAD users. So KCL takes every Revit file and converts it to a 3D CAD. That itself, I'm going to say, is not super special, but we also convert it into nice AutoCAD layers, where if you take a standard Revit file and export it, you're going to get maybe one layer, maybe two layers out of it. So this tries to give you some better layering. KCL actually was last summer, again at the request of users, added a flatten command. And if I right click on this 3D, I can flatten it, which will give me 2D to use with AutoCAD, AutoCAD LT, or whatever other CAD programs they want. So we build bridges when we see issues, but if you do as a manufacturer, you do 2D CAD with the Revit, you're going to get something that looks like this, which is the best possibility. Because here, this isn't perfect. It ended up with a line on the floor for the clearance. But if I'm a 2D person, this is a lot easier than having to clean up the 3D. The plan view here doesn't show any utility symbols. So there are things that may be lacking, but being able to get the geometry in 2D is really important for a lot of users or subscribers. So that point hopefully has been made by all of us. Do CAD and Revit. If you do the Revit, they can generate CAD from it. Everything matches well. Here's another one. One more question here we'll go with. Start with Daniel. Really, what's a good explanation of what Revit families versus CAD or even CAD 3D?
Well, the biggest one I would say is a Revit family is all inclusive. It not just shows all of your geometry and possible options, but as we have all mentioned at one point or another today so far, talks about the actual parameters, that information on the specification sheets that is being communicated amongst the design team, electrical information, plumbing, whatever it may be. All those parameters are included within the Revit family and allows for smoother communication and hopefully, at the end of the day, less mistakes or less missed information in the project on site.
That's a good answer. Appreciate that. Jeff, any thoughts on explaining just a high-level overview of Revit families versus either CAD or CAD 3D?
Well, as Daniel mentioned, you can only get so much information from a CAD block itself, whether it's 3D or not. And as we know, as families, the shared parameters are what drive a schedule inside a Revit project. And you cannot do that with CAD. CAD, you just have to keep building and adding manually your utility information. So on top of what Daniel was saying, there's not much more you can really explain the two.
Okay. Yeah. Again, my high level view is Revit is a 3D graphic data with information, and each user can add their own information to it that may be custom for their own design firm or dealership. Where with AutoCAD, you've got the symbol, and again, the KCL plug is we've got the attributes in a database that you can add to it. So the Revit people might shoot me when I say this. AutoCAD with the balloon attributes in KCL, it has BIM data. It's just not at a level. Revit was designed from the ground up to be 3D. It was designed to have information in the model. And AutoCAD is just a general, basically design tool that you can do anything with. So you can, in the end, replicate what you do in each program when someone says, show me what it looks like, 3D AutoCAD or 3D Revit. You can do 2D Revit. You can do, when you're printing out schedules and not know how it was generated. But Revit is really designed for the future, for collaboration and a higher level of detail inside the model. We did get a question from a manufacturer about reviewing content. Since you two are on, I'll say, do both of you, if a manufacturer approaches you, would you be able to provide an evaluation of their current content or some of their content? Jeff?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
The evaluation would not just stick with, does it have the right shared parameters? Does it have the right, is in the right year? Is it running the FCSI standards?
Mhm.
But it goes down into the details. Is it actually usable in a project?
Good point.
And Daniel probably would also add to that is we also submit PDF files of your equipment as you would see it in a schedule or in a architect's drawing at that scale. So you don't have to have Revit to review what is submitted.
And that's important because most manufacturers don't have, if you're working with someone in sales and marketing, they're certainly not going to use Revit. Daniel?
Yep, we do the very similar. We are willing to do free peer reviews on pieces of equipment, series of equipment if needed. We provide them exactly with what is showing up when it is brought into a project, and we will go through in comparison with cut sheets, what's available in auto quotes for specification options, and making sure and adding comments of what we recommend, how it could be improved, things that are great with it. If there's no issues, whatever those may be, and we return a report back to the manufacturers and are open for explaining our findings. And again, easy to read, no Revit requirement needed to understand the reports that we return.
Excellent. So for the manufacturer to ask that question, you can always contact me. I can provide contact info for Daniel or Jeff, and they will be happy to look at it. I know that some of our manufacturers have gone through different content creators before these 5 were available. And that's something to look at, that if you send one file, it's hard to get a good representation of everything. I'm happy to help that we kind of sort of can tell who made which files. There's little things that all the content creators do slightly differently. Nothing is wrong with that, but it helps us get a better, hey, let's see if we can figure that out. Sometimes we can't if they've used multiple contractors, but you have the offer to get your information reviewed. So that covers a lot of the questions that we want to provide that are commonly asked by the manufacturers, as well as designers and dealers that are looking for content. Any of these contractors can help you create content if that's what you're looking for. We're really almost at the end of time. We'll probably go a minute or too long here. Jeff, anything you want to add just to provide to the audience today before I show a couple Revit tips?
No, I think we've gone over quite a bit. Just keep in mind to get that quality, not necessarily total render quality, but there's a fine line between both. Going fully render and going total options. So keep in mind the content creator is trying to help you keep the files small and usable.
Great, good point. Daniel, anything else that you'd like to add? As I said, I'm just going to go and show some little Revit tip when we're done here.
No, I think Jeff pretty much is reading my mind on that one there. It's we're all here to try and assist in bringing the best content to the manufacturers, to the designers, to everyone that is needing this stuff out there. And we appreciate the opportunity to come talk with you.
Yeah, this is, again, I think to me it establishes this is one of the reasons why we recommend your firms and the others is we're all in a similar agreement, that we want to, provide the best data we can. And how we do it, everything is very similar, and it's a matter of who you're more comfortable working with, what timeframes. I mean, there might be a project where I'm just making this up that, Daniel, your group can say, hey, we're 5 weeks, and Jeff says we're 2 weeks, or it could be vice versa. So when we send out the names to the manufacturers, that's part of your investigation of how large is the project? Are you breaking it apart? We work closely with all the content creators, and happy to answer any questions offline via email about that. We did get another question here. Here we go. Question was, if another content creator is used versus the 5 shown, do they still get uploaded to KCL? If so, who verifies they're built correctly? Great question, Nick. I like to tell people KCL is a gatekeeper, but the gate gets driven through a lot, okay? We will look at some real basics. We will look at the file size. And honestly, if it's below 5 meg, we're not going to really jump on them. I know for some of you that might sound large, but most people have good Revit computers. It's not a killer, if it's a few megabytes. We also look at the basic parameters. I cannot tell you how many times over the last decade we get a file from a manufacturer. There's no manufacturer or model number in that Revit family. Now, we do not go through all the utilities. We just look, we want it at least to be able to schedule with their name. If they're using something that's close enough to FCSI, if it's FCSI standards, you're good to go. If it's close enough that our system can automatically map, maybe they had a typo that it said clearance and there was a misspelling, we can fix some of that automatically, we'll do that. So there is no full verification, but yes, anyone can send content. In fact, a couple things that have come up, I'm going to try to pop in here to KCL if I can, that if you're a Revit user in KCL, one of the little tips is there's a small little R icon below the 3D preview. And so even if you don't have Revit, I'm going to show a little more info because I got different levels of access. But here you can see information. I can see the cold water, the pressure, the cold water size before loaded into Revit. So if you're a manufacturer, and I don't know if we've done this with either of you, but we do sometimes have a manufacturer that says, hey, we want to take a look at it before we post it. We can provide a preview access to you or the manufacturer, and they can actually look at the graphic here, see what it looks like. They can look at the 3D version of it, and they can zoom in and out. We can even change this here to like a solid, and you can rotate it around. Now that's a pretty simple piece, so we're not seeing a lot there. But the idea is we have some additional tools that they're giving PDFs to you to review. If you want a little more, we can load it in KCL, but not for the public. And you still have access to preview the type of information that's here, gas, electric, plumbing as well. So that's one tip. The other thing we want you to know about is in Revit, waiting for it to show up, there's a couple new functions we've been telling people about. I'm going to go to Modify Settings in the KCL toolbar. On the Parameter tab, you can now tell KCL where to load the family. It's not a huge deal to most users, but we went through a spell where some manufacturers were creating things in plumbing or casework, and then you'd load it in and it would not show on a specialty equipment schedule. There's a workaround with a multi-category tab, but what we did is said, hey, you can now tell it, leave it as is, specialty, plumbing, or casework, and we'll do the work for you. If you're using Revit 2022, there's a new one called food service. So instead of having to go back to the content creator and make a food service category family, we will do that for any users as they load it, okay? On that same screen, there's a set manufacturer model description value is uppercase. Revit does not have an uppercase command that I'm aware of. And so in your more current versions of Revit, we've built this to default to uppercase. Again, that's a little more technical, but we wanted to throw a couple tech tips in. So if you have any questions, ask. Very similar is what happens if you already load the families. The families are in the project, which I guess I should put one in there. Let's do that. How do I change it afterwards? And yes, you can edit the family and you can add shared parameters. You can work on changing the category, but we also provide a tool under parameters and more where you can add missing parameters and you can choose what you want to add. Chilled water, which one? If you're a company that uses their own shared parameter file and you've linked it to KCL, we can even add your shared parameters. Again, on that KCL parameters and more, there's a change family category. So I can change one or multiple Revit families to any other category that we have listed here. So if you're working, it's a bigger deal in Revit 2022. Because of the new food service, we have some people that want to use it right away. Well, none of the families are set there. Others want to stick with specialty because that's their template and their schedules. We do our best to try to make everyone happy, but we want to make sure you know about these tools. So under parameters and more, add parameters, change the category. You can even uppercase text for any of these. So we can always go back and do uppercase text later as well. So those are a couple of Revit tools we wanted to share today. Really appreciate everyone joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to email kevin@kclcad.com. You can always visit our website. Let's see if I got it up here. And there's always a contact us with any questions. Be happy to get back to you and help you out. Thank you again to Jeff and Daniel for joining us. We appreciate the expertise and working together. We hope everyone has a great day today. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.